live. So hi everyone, good evening. So this is the first session of the series on education philosophy and curriculum design. So I was just doing a bit of context setting for all the participants who came in. But let me state the agenda of the next 2 weeks sessions. So at the end of all these sessions, or even if you were to attend only a few of these sessions, we'll be seeing a lot of case studies. We'll pick up some topics and we'll see some worksheets which were designed by us in the past. And we'll analyze those worksheets to understand how we can make worksheets which solve 3 problem statements. One is, how can we make a worksheet which can make learners self-learn? Which can make learners self-learn. That's the first objective, that learners should be able to self-learn. And the second thing is, can we get the learners to dive deep into whatever topics they're going into? Because usually in our everyday experience, we get into the factual details, but not so much into conceptual details. How do we go into conceptual details? That is something we will hopefully see today. And the third thing is, can we discover some mythbusters around learning? So generally there are some illusions or myths we have around learning. We'll probably discover that. So I repeat once again, one is mythbusters around learning. I have one interesting article also around mythbusters around learning. I will share that with you all at the end of the session. And second is to make worksheets which will help people in self-learning. And the third thing is in-depth immersion into whatever topic people go into. So now this is what you'll probably gain at the end of the sessions. So I'd want to start the discussion by making a promise. So there's one thing which Professor Patrick Winston of MIT says. He says, starting your session with a joke is probably not a good idea, because people are still thinking on whether they should listen to you or not. They're probably putting their mobile phones and laptops aside and all of that. So they're probably not going to pay attention to your joke. He says a great way to start your session is to start it with a promise. So let me make a promise that with this methodology of combining structured thinking and design thinking, something which I'm going to talk of today, I'll tell you what we were able to achieve in one school called Tejashwi Vidyaranya in Hyderabad 3 years back. We went to grade 6 and we were having a worksheet on fractions. More than 80% of the class solved more than 80% of the problems accurately without being given any guidance of any format. I repeat, in a class of around maybe 25 students, 20 students were able to solve maybe 8 on 10 questions without any help of any adult, all on their own with the help of these worksheets. So how is something you will get to know, which is why you're all here. But before we go into the how, let's address the why. Would this be fantastic if we can crack this problem that most kids can learn without any help of anyone, just by going through a sheet and solving what's in the sheet? Why do you think it would be wonderful?
Well, I wouldn't call it automation, but it's sort of removing a lot of the need or a lot of the labor a teacher does in a job.
Absolutely. And what happens when you remove all that burden from a teacher?
The teacher has extra time to do more things that can actually develop the person's personality. Plus, if you can apply this method in one sheet of paper without context, then you could do it with a lot of other things as well, right?
Absolutely. And another perspective to add here is, how many of you heard of hole in the wall experiment? Okay, no one? Okay, never mind. That's a very interesting experiment. So do check it out after the discussion today. There's a lot of literature around it. So in the hole in the wall experiment, what they did was, there are multiple variants of it. But one of the variants is, they took a tablet, they covered the tablet and, put only a circular opening. Tablet as in, your gadget tablet, right? So they covered it on all sides and they put it inside a tree trunk or something. And different tribals had to interact with the tablet. So what happened was initially, I mean, the adults couldn't figure out how the tablet works, but the kids in the place were actually able to figure out how the tablet works all on their own without any guidance. This is one version which people talk of. And but another very interesting experiment is they went and gave tablets to kids in a village where the kids probably were not familiar with the language also. Eventually, a few kids figured out how to use the tablet. Then they started running around in the entire village saying they figured it out, and they taught the other kids, and eventually the whole village figured out how to use the tablets. Now, whichever variant you go by, whether the variant of people running in the village and telling them they figured out the tablet, or you put it in a tree bark and you let people use it. What do these two variants actually tell you about learning? Avantika, I understand you're mumbling, but it will help if you unmute and speak. Yeah.
Firstly, there's the component of self-learning as well. So I'm not going to make a few assumptions on why the children were able to do it, but I will make the assumption that, let's say, the second part, the children were able to teach everybody else, right? So the self-learning, I think so, would have played an impact on how they taught others. That was what I was mumbling.
Fair enough. Self-learning, being able to teach others. Thank you, Avantika, for the perspective. Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Vishank. I think learning is not only about self-learning, but it's also about how you learn as a group. Because after you get one idea, it's really important to start collaborating and make others get others' opinion on that idea and see if they can actually think that through, or if their perspective on the idea. So what can they do with it? Do they understand the idea, etc.?
Okay. So Avantika and Grishan, both of you spoke from the learner's perspective. Now, let us say Government of India appoints both of you as instruction designers. You have to design modules to educate people. You have to design ways to educate people. And you're supposed to educate people on how to stay safe with online transactions. While making online payments, you have to educate people on how to stay safe. Now, you're trying to teach people how to stay safe. Now, by listening to this experiment, how is this a good news for you? When you're trying to teach people, how is this a good news for you?
Okay, I have one point. Perhaps it's the ability that they can learn themselves if you give them the right tools only.
Sure, makes sense, Avantika.
And then it's also that you have a big platform, right? You're the government of India. So you can pretty much bring a lot of people together, right? If there are two people and all.
Yeah. So before going into the how, one last comment on the why part is one big problem with most of the curriculum designers of today is most curriculum designers tend to underestimate the learner. Most curriculum designers tend to underestimate the learner. So one very important comment is, as a curriculum designer, do you want a vicious cycle for yourself or do you want a virtuous cycle for yourself? Right? So let me first talk about the vicious cycle, which we see in our curriculum design right now. So today, in a way, I mean, I'll use an analogy. Today, India's education, in general, global education also, to a large extent, it's like Maggi noodles. You cook most of it and you give it to people. Most of the cooking is already done in the factory. People just boil it at home and eat it. So most of the processing of that information or knowledge or anything is done by the curriculum designer. Very little is left for the teacher, very little is left for the student. So there's almost nothing which is happening in the classroom, because all that debating, all that discussion which could have happened was done by the think tank which designed the textbook. Now it's a vicious cycle because the burden is on you to make sure the child learns. The burden is on you to make sure the teacher, creates a good learning experience. You are trying to do everything, but then for you to do everything for everyone is a daunting task. The way a kid wants to learn in Bangalore, the way a kid wants to learn in UAE, the way a kid wants to learn in Delhi, the way a kid wants to learn in Thoothukudi, the southernmost tip, airport in Tamil Nadu, right? Or the way a kid wants to learn in Cherrapunji could be very different. So this is a vicious cycle. From vicious cycle, can we come into a virtuous cycle? A virtuous cycle where we believe that the teacher and the student are very capable of figuring out something on their own. Like what the hole in the wall experiment suggests. So if I believe the teacher is sincere, the child is sincere, both of them wish to learn, then 80% of the burden of learning rests with the teacher and the student. Only 20% of the burden is with me as a curriculum designer. But if you look at the vicious cycle, 80% of the burden of creating the learning was on me as a curriculum designer, and 20% was on the student and the teacher. Now, the student and the teacher were not having any fun in the class because I was doing everything. Neither they were having fun, nor they had the space to do any processing or interpretation or meaning making or sense making, whatever you wish to call it. It is problematic. But if you can actually give that space to the student and the teacher in the classroom to figure out, your life becomes easier. Mainly because the burden of learning is on the student and the teacher. And if they are not able to do, they come back to you. But if you look at the vicious cycle, how many students write a letter to NCERT saying, I didn't understand this in the textbook? But if you move the paradigm from the vicious cycle to virtuous cycle, you will see students writing a letter saying, hey, I really liked what you wrote in this book. I want to know more. Can you tell me how? You might say, what if millions of children start writing letters? No problem. We'll form communities of all of them. We'll find a ways to address all their questions. But the point is the kid even wanting to come and ask a question? Maybe the outliers are, some kids are, but the question is, how do we get all the kids to do that? So did I make a compelling case for why we have to move from the vicious cycle to the virtuous cycle? So the objective is, can I make learning the responsibility of a student and a teacher rather than the responsibility of the policy maker or the curriculum designer and all that? Now the question is, what if I'm a teacher and I do not have understanding of that subject, and I'm a student, I do not have understanding of the subject. So I will need some help from the curriculum designer. So what is that bare minimum? What is that bare minimum that I can give to the teacher and the student through which they're self-sufficient? The objective is not to spoon feed them. The objective is not to teach them, but the objective is to make them self-sufficient. Avantika, you have a question?
Yeah, is it like nudging them? Or
no, I mean, it's like, let's say Vrishank and Avantika want to cook something. So my objective is not to cook and give them something. My objective is to give you the equipment, give you the training manuals or the know-how or maybe YouTube videos of how you operate that equipment, give you the raw materials, give you all the troubleshooting mechanisms. So now you're self-sufficient. You can figure it out from there. I'm not needed anymore.
Okay.
So if there's a teacher in the class and there's a student in the class, can I make the teacher and student self-sufficient that they're able to handle it on their own? Rather than me doing or me telling them what to do. Yeah, Vrishan.
Just like clarification question. You like me doing it on your own, you mean, but you can still give like some amount of raw materials, right? Or like no help at all?
No, you can give raw materials, but the question is not to spoon feed them.
Okay.
I mean, again, that's a very philosophical question of what amounts to spoon feeding. But again, that's a very important question to ask. Am I spoon feeding them? Because if I spoon feed the student and the teacher, I'm robbing them of their eureka moment. You get my phrase, right? I'm robbing them of their eureka moment. The student and the teacher could have had a great discussion in the classroom. I'm stealing that moment away from them. But again, if I leave too much to them, they might be anxious. They may not know how to figure it out. Let us say there's a teacher who doesn't know string theory, but wants to discuss string theory with the students. So can I develop a little worksheet and give the teacher? So the teacher can use that worksheet and start discussing string theory with the student, even though she doesn't know about string theory.
The student also doesn't know, right? The students also.
We're assuming so.
I think, like, can I give an example of like a learning method?
Yeah.
So
Sure.
maybe because it's like mutually no one knows much about string theory. I mean, firstly, there has to be some idea that can carry forward so that the whole topic of string theory is actually learned properly. Because if there's no idea that is taken forward, the discussion of string theory throughout the classroom won't really have that connection or won't really make sense to the students. So maybe start off with something like a crossword so that the teacher can also understand something, get some vocabulary out of it, and the students can understand some basic words and also enjoy at the same time, so it goes into their mind better. After the teacher has that idea of each of the words, maybe it can be a role of research. So each student gets a task, or like gets a task to go and research about the specific thing. So so if the topic is big bang, one word is explosion, one word is this that. So how was the big bang related to an explosion? That could be a question that could carry forward towards one of the students, so that can develop their ideas. So once all the ideas are there, then you can form a conclusion.
Sure, Vrishank. I'd like to bring in two perspectives just to build on what you said. Point number one, there's a pedagogy which is discussed a lot today called flip learning. So as per flip learning, what can be done is the teacher can give a small activity for the, again, this activity could be designed by the teacher or this activity could be given by the curriculum designer, which the teacher can improvise. So the kid can do that activity and come into the class just to warm up and just to get that little excitement, right? So, I mean, that activity could be maybe watching a YouTube video or maybe thinking about something or maybe doing a small cracker explosion at home or anything which they consider relevant. But apart from that, one very important thing which you see a lot more in the research community, which we do not see much in schools and colleges, but we see in the research community, is in the research community, whenever any topic is introduced, you spend some time trying to discuss the why part. So, and you start with something very relatable to the whole class. You discuss a why and you start with something relatable and then you go into the how. And for the record, we still didn't enter the how, we're still in the why. I mean, we're still in the why, or why are we trying to develop this kind of a curriculum? So when you spend enough time around the why, what happens is the learners get fascinated by it. And when the learners get fascinated by it, as Vrishank rightly articulated, there's probably more interest going into the discussion. But Vrishank, but one very important perspective to note here is, as a curriculum designer, if you do not give enough hand-holding support to the student and the teacher, they can be extremely anxious when they're dealing with a technical concept. Like with string theory, you might say, hey, just go Google and learn. But that can be very anxiety-inducing journey because it can be very, very open-ended. So sometimes, I mean, look, if I have all the time in the world to go figure out string theory, that's fine. But what if I've given myself limited time to just go figure it out? Then a little guided framework could be helpful. So that's where the curriculum designer comes in to create those activities, to put those little information packets, to introduce the information in the right format, little at once. Now, what is that right format? What do you mean by little at once is basically what I'm going to be discussing now. Now, before moving into the structured thinking and design thinking concepts, which I wanted to introduce, I'll show you a small sample. I'll show you the exact fractions worksheet which we used in that school, which I spoke about the beginning. If anybody has any question, you can ask me in the meanwhile. Until then, I'm just getting that fractions worksheet for you people. Okay. I have my worksheet ready. So let me share that. So this is like the worksheet. If you can see this fractions worksheet, what we did was we gave a solved example. Please this is a warm up. This worksheet was meant for students of grade 6. This was a warm up sheet, which means the concepts here are ideally of grade 4, grade 5. Okay. So we gave a question, interpret the fraction 5 by 8. So you fill in something which you consider a whole, something which you consider a part, and then what is the part of the whole, you fill that in. And if it is 5 by 8, I have 5 pastries with me, and the size of each pastry is 1/8 of the cake. So the interpretation is I have 5 pastries of size 1 by 8 and I draw it. Now here there's one more question where you're given pizza and you're told it's a slice. So how many slices are in a pizza here? People by the left side, 8. How many slices are with you?
5.
5.
And what is the size of each pizza slice?
1/8
1/8 of the entire pizza.
Fraction interpretation.
It's 5 pizza. No, 5 slices of pizzas, which is 5/8 of a pizza.
Of size 1 by 8, yeah, or which is 1/8 of a pizza. So there are 2 problems which are where you have fill in the blanks. But the third one, there's no fill in the blank. We want the kid to, fill it up. Now, why do we have example followed by fill in the blanks followed by a whole blank?
So you can measure the ongoing understanding of the child. So after a certain point, do they get it or do they still need help? Because if you give fill in the blank, it helps guide them so they'll get an understanding. Then when you take it off, it'll test if they have understood it or not.
Okay. Then
Like regulating the amount of info they're having to put. So that
if you are too little, there's anxiety. Too much, it's spoon feeding.
yeah.
Now this is another one where identification of fractions. So there's a structure and there's a story, and they give a judgment. Is it a proper fraction or improper fraction or mixed fraction? So we initially have fill in the blanks again. Then representation on the number line again. We have an example. Okay, this is a little problematic. It was supposed to be filled. So again, there are blanks and then completely blank. To check whether 2 fractions are the same or not in the same format. Now, I have a question to ask you. Many kids who usually did not like mathematics actually did this worksheet, and as I told you, more than 80% of the kids got more than 80% of the questions right. And there was one girl in the class who apparently failed in most of the exams in the school. But she was slow, but she managed to complete all the problems. Why do you think the kids were successful when it comes to this worksheet?
Because it's more on the child's learning throughout, because the learning is just not rushed. It's given after a period I mean, it takes some period of time so that like you can understand. So first you have the certain basics that you can just get to warm up, then you can go above to check if you understood. And it's like a self check, so it's more about yourself in that whole situation of the worksheet. So you keep checking if you've learned within yourself. So I think that would have helped in
Okay, I have 2 questions here. Question 1. The kids didn't have doubts, they figured it out on their own. How? That's my first question. Second question is, the kids were very engaged. They didn't look here and there. All of them were very busy in their sheets, trying to fill the sheets. A, how were they able to figure it out without help? B, why were they so engaged?
Can I try?
Sure.
For first question, maybe it's because all the information was layered. So everything that they had in that one question would be in the same sheet, it would be in the same layer only. So you didn't really have to remember something from some days ago. Second question, was that, wait, what was the second question? I'm sorry.
Why were they so engaged? Why didn't they look here and there?
Maybe it's because an exam is supposed to be interactive, right? Like,
But generally kids get bored, or they're not happy, or they're distracted and all of that, right?
yeah, I know.
Why were they very happy, excited, and thoroughly engaged in this?
I
Could it
think
be the same reason it became interactive?
Okay. Yeah, Vrishan.
I think it's because it wasn't just solely based on the question itself, but it was also based on your real life experiences. So they could actually relate it to their real life, so they would have a better understanding overall, and they could actually comprehend the question.
Okay.
Comprehend.
Sure, Vrishan. That definitely makes a lot of sense. So now I have a question. Why do kids like video games a lot? Most of them.
Because in some of them, they know that there is a goal to achieve,
Okay.
and there's also fun at the same time.
Okay. Avantika.
First of all, it lets you be an entirely different person, but it also makes sure that you're the person who's controlling the entire thing.
Okay. You're a control freak. Okay. Are you?
That's questionable, debatable.
Okay. And Satya has gone silent today.
I'm thread building.
You could also speak while thread building.
Oh.
Yeah. Sure. So, yeah. Rucha, go ahead.
Yes, I think in video games, maybe you are not like it guides you in a way so that you don't get lost. So you don't feel like, okay, I don't know this. That is why it is seamless. Another thing I feel in video games is, again going back to the distraction points. I feel you get distracted when it is too easy or too hard. In video games, it's just giving you that enough part so that you are engaged over there. You know how to do it, but it's not too easy. So that is why I think you are more engaged throughout.
Okay, and as Avantika says, you have that play again or start over button in case you lose some. So if you go to this worksheet, I mean, I had two observations to make when I was observing the kids while they were doing this worksheet. So in this worksheet, you don't restrict the kids to the examples which you have. So in the area where it was completely blank, the kids could pick up their own examples. Some of them were like, kids and school. The parts were kids and the whole is school. One of them were like ink drops and pen. He said ink drops make a pen. Wheel, spoke, flower, petal. All of them were very imaginative. They would come up with their own examples. And what I noticed is, when you're picking up a very abstract concept, and if you give a framework through which your learner can pick up his or her own example and travel through your concept through the own example, your learner enjoys it. Because it's like a process of creation, right? Because if you do not give the opportunity for the learner to bring in an own example, what happens is the learner is just repeating the same thing again and again, right? Otherwise, mathematics, the methods which you're probably going to use are going to be repetitive. Two simple things there. One is the opportunity to create my own example is creatively stimulating. I enjoy thinking through examples and traveling through my examples. It gives you that same literature wala feel in mathematics. That why is poetry so fulfilling? That whatever thoughts you have within yourself, you get the opportunity to express them. And that's a very fulfilling experience to express yourself. So in mathematics as well, you can get that opportunity to express yourself if you can bring in your own example. That's one thing. And the second thing is, when you can link this structure with various examples, you get the opportunity to interpret. You're constantly interpreting what is otherwise a very dry and factual territory. So your brain is thoroughly engaged. That's when there's depth in that sense making which you're getting into. Constant interpretation and those creative juices in you which are flowing because you're looking for examples. So this is a golden mantra which I use in my worksheets, which is I create one solved example or two solved examples, and I create a framework where the learner can come up with their own example and go with the same framework with their own example. When you give the opportunity to your learner to create their own example, generally the experience is very pleasant. Because this is something which people do not do. I mean, Satya, Avantika, Vrishank, if you guys can recall, when you participate in the deep thought Socratic dialogues, you are given the opportunity to pick up any business of your choice. What if deep thought gave you a business and said, okay, do it for that business?
I'd probably become anxious about how much I actually knew in that business.
Okay, apart from your anxiety, would you enjoy working with a business idea which you like, or one which is given to you?
One which we like.
And why?
We can bring in our own ideas.
I'll tell a simple story here. When I first started doing design thinking programs in schools in 2016, we were one of the first in Hyderabad to introduce design thinking to schools. When I was doing that, the school said, you know, Tarun, the kids may not be good enough to pick up their own topics. Why don't you give them? I said, don't ever do that. The kids won't own the project. Then pura burden will be on me to make them do the project. I said, let them pick up their topic. If there's any problem with the topic, I'm there now. As a mentor, I can fine tune it. I can guide them. I can help them craft it better and so on. But the moment the kids were able to pick up their own ideas, everybody was desperate to be successful because they picked up the ideas. So when your learners have the ownership of the learning, your life is easy. You don't have to push them and ensure they complete their learning. You just have to enable that learning, and if they have any need, they'll come to you and ask. You can just sit back, enjoy and relax. If the onus of the learning is on the learner and not on the curriculum designer or the teacher. So then the important question is, why is the curriculum designer needed? Why is the teacher needed? The curriculum designer and the teacher are needed to enable that learning of the student. I mean, enable the learning ownership of the student. So even in this session, I'm not here to, make sure Vrishank learns, or make sure Avantika learns, or make sure Satya learns. I'm here to enable the learning ownership. That is, at the end of today's session, if Avantika goes back and says, I need to make a worksheet, and my worksheet should make people go like, wow. People should I should be able to see people's eyes light up after doing my worksheet. If Avantika thinks like that, I've succeeded in my workshop. If Avantika wants to make such a worksheet and she's desperate to make that worksheet, I've succeeded. Did I give her the complete toolkit of how to make that worksheet? No, I have not. But once Avantika owns up that goal of hers, she will make sure she bugs me, she questions me, and gets it all out of me to learn those things and execute that worksheet. What gaps Avantika has, I will never know. I can't mind read her. But the moment she owns it up, whatever gap she has, she knows she'll come, she'll ask me, and she'll make sure she's successful. So when you can give people that room to interpret, when you can give people that room to interpret on their own, to pick their own examples and so on, it'll get their creative juices going, and it'll also enable that learning ownership in people. So two simple concepts here. One is that gradual journey. Second is letting people pick their own example and travel through that gradual journey through their own example. Like a computer game, gradual journey. Other thing is letting people travel through their own example. Now, before we close today's session, we will have a Q&A. But before the Q&A, one important concept again to introduce all of you to is, how do you see, as a teacher or as a curriculum designer, this becomes very important. How do you mix your divergence and convergence? Sometimes in a class you need divergence. That is, you want to get a variety of opinion. You want to get a variety of examples. Let us say, I'm asking, can you please come up with a story for 5 by 8? Satya might say 5 spokes, 8 spokes make a wheel. Avantika might say 5 petals, 8 petals make a flower. Vrishang might say 5 brains, 8 brains are needed to complete the project. So different people, basis their culture, basis their academic background, basis whatever they know and whatever they like, people will come up with their own examples. Sometimes in the class, I need some divergence, because divergence makes the class vibrant and opens up the thinking of your learners. It ensures that your learners are not myopic. They're not going only in one direction. It makes them see that, okay, there are various ways of looking at it. And also, if Satya is talking about wheel and spoke, maybe I'm not interested in wheel and spoke. Maybe I like flowers. So I like what Avantika says. Maybe I like brains. So maybe I like what Vrishang says. So if there are 5 or 6 examples spoken in the class, I might sync up with maybe 2 or 3 examples and I might be interested in the class. So when you can create enough experiences of divergence, that I think is a great way to bring the whole class together, because everybody syncs up with one or more. And even better is, you give 2 minutes time to everybody to write their own example. Because it is quite possible that people don't like all the 5 examples. I could be so eccentric, I could be so different that no, I don't like all your examples. I'm from a different planet altogether. You give me 2 minutes to write down my own example, then okay, I'll push. Okay, I got my chance. I wrote my example. So some moments of divergence are important, so you can explore different ways, and one or more of the flavors might excite you. But there are places where you need convergence, because there's a very important concept you want to convey among people, and that concept is going to make a difference to how they do things. For example, in today's discussion, I had some important concepts like gradual journey, like learning ownership, at least 10-15 concepts which are brought in. If I don't bring in that convergence, everybody will go in their own opinion. There's no concrete learning outcome for everybody. So that convergence is very important if you want to ensure that people go back home with that learning. So if there's so much of divergence and no convergence, you'll be like, hey, I had a very good discussion, but I seriously don't know what I learned. But if you had a lot of convergence and no divergence, it's a one-way street, a unidirectional street. You're seeing one perspective, but you may not be able to see other perspectives which are very important to learning. Why different perspectives? Why you need to see multiple perspectives? We will discuss that in one of the sessions. The role of extrapolation of ideas concept, which I talk about. So convergence and divergence being mixed is very important, is one comment I want to leave you with, and probably will deep dive into convergence and divergence ka mixture at some point of time. But maybe I'll just stop here and I will take some questions. Avantika, you're on mute.
Yeah. So I have one question. So if we're giving layers, or if we're giving one paper that's about one topic, another paper that's about another topic, do we have to maintain like a flow or something, or can we just?
Sure, that's a very good question. See, you can do it in a standalone manner. You can definitely do it in a standalone manner, but you miss out on the momentum which you probably gained. You miss out on the momentum which you probably gained in your previous session. So if you gained some momentum somewhere, you might want to connect it to this, so that momentum transfers into this new session. But again, if you want a fresh beginning, you want to start with a clean slate, there you may not want to invoke the previous session. So again, see, it's a design thing, right? And design is a creative. There can be various ways in which you want to do it. So you may have one path where you invoke the previous thing to gain the momentum. And there's probably another path where you don't invoke the previous thing because you want to start with a clean slate.
Okay.
Next question.
How can we bring in conversions without asserting or without actually going about, okay, this is what I wanted to let you know through all these topics. So how can we converge it?
Okay, that's a good question. So for me, the answer is simple. If you have a concept, right, your concept is guiding you on a difference between a right and a wrong. So, I mean, if it didn't guide you regarding the right and the wrong, you probably have no value in the concept. It's giving you a kind of truth. Like, would you encourage people to write their own example or would you not encourage? So, according to this concept which we discussed today, if you encourage people to come up with their own example, that gives them space. It'll give them that space for individual opinion. So that's right and that's. But if you don't give them that opportunity, in a way it's wrong because you're not giving them that individual space. So every concept in a way creates a right and a wrong, right? So you want to bring in convergence, pick a wrong which can happen when the concept is not followed and present that as a situation and ask people if that's okay. And keep supplying hints until they come back to your concept as an answer to how to make that wrong into a right. But as a teacher, it is very important for you to have that understanding of that right and wrong. Now you see, even I am basically answering you with that right and wrong. I'm saying if you are able to guide those people with the right and wrong, you're right. If you're not able to guide them with the right and wrong, they're lost. They won't listen to you. That's wrong. So that's a golden mantra. Like when you want to handle a concept, you've got to know enough examples of, if I'm in the virtuous mode, what is happening with the concept? If I'm in the vicious mode, what is happening with the concept? The moment I have enough examples of the virtuous mode and enough examples of the vicious mode, I will be able to impress upon the concept, upon the audience. So the audience, there's a buy-in from the audience. My learners buy into the concept and say, hey, I believe in this concept. I'll have to, implement this concept. So to create that buy-in, I will need virtuous examples and vicious examples. Next question. We have time for 2 more questions. Whoever has it can just unmute and go ahead.
Like different people learn at different rates. So how can we make sure that through our worksheets the learning rates are, they are together. People learn together. Someone doesn't run off or become better.
So it's important for us to recognize that in a classroom we only expose people to concepts, but the actual mastery of concepts, every flower has its own time to sprout. So some student may get it through 3 examples, some student may get it through 8 examples. So can you give the student this kind of a framework so the student who's actually not getting it can try multiple examples? This is anyway a guided framework. The student who's getting it, you say fine, I'll give you a stretch problem, solve it. If you can solve it, skip it, go to the next one. So with this kind of a framework, you give the power to the student on, do I want to go slow here? Do I want to go faster? If I want to go slow, I will use the framework, the fill in the blanks framework. In deep thought, we call it a scaffolding. So scaffolding, I'm already given a scaffolding, I fill up the scaffolding. So it's like bicycle ka support wheels. I use the support wheels I fill multiple examples using the support wheels. But if I'm already clear, I will not use the scaffolding. I'll write it from scratch. I'll try different examples. So the point is, every student takes his or her own time to master the concept. So you can let them pick up as many examples as they want to and pursue those examples to get that mastery. But the objective in a class is only to expose them. But beyond that, outside class hours, they would probably do different dosages of practice.
So when we talk about the role of a teacher and the role of a curriculum designer, is it like the curriculum designer designs a framework for the learning to happen, but the teacher's role is to just guide the student through that framework? Or is there?
So there can be different schools of thought. There can be different schools of thought around that, right? I mean, what is the role of a curriculum designer? What is the role of a teacher? But the school of thought which I subscribe to is the curriculum designer is creating an environment and is creating a kind of a plug and play tool for the teacher. So if I'm a teacher, I take that plug and play tool and that has all, and that makes me self-sufficient. I have all that I need to go and create that learning experience for a child. Now the question is, if I'm a teacher, why am I needed? So if there's a child who's a self-learner, probably I'm not needed. The child will take the curriculum and do it. But even though I'm not needed, maybe I can add value by asking some questions, by taking the child to the next level, by bringing in some reflective processes and so on. So I can be the link between the child and the curriculum. Now, as a curriculum designer, why am I needed? Because I am doing the actual research of the concept. I'm trying to understand psychologically how people react to it. That's my research. And then I make all these elements and given in a plug and play framework for a teacher to take over from there. But again, I'm that kind of a curriculum designer who respects the autonomy of a teacher and wants to give enough scope for a teacher to improvise and localize for the child. Because what examples I might give, the framework in which I might operate may not be best suited for the child, may not excite the child. So if I'm giving enough opportunity for the teacher to, personalize it and customize it and localize it for the child, I'm probably giving my module a greater chance of success.
Then why were these rigid frameworks developed? I mean, what allowed them to flourish?
Simple, right? You wouldn't trust the person. That's what I said at the beginning. One big problem of curriculum designers is they don't trust that the kid wants to learn or that the teachers are very sincere about learning and so on. But the moment you trust that every human being loves to learn, as long as I give a environment where they get to express themselves and learn, then I'll give myself opportunities to do that. I mean, if you were to ask me a one-word answer, that one-word answer would be trust. If there's trust between the stakeholders, I think a lot is possible.
While the reality is like there are a lot of teachers who may not be good enough to actually expose the students to different perspectives or to actually use that framework. And as like few students are self learners, but at the same time few aren't. So when a curriculum designer is giving flexibility, the students who can't self learn is getting harmed in the way.
No, you're harming them even further, right? If there's a student who can't self learn, what is your first responsibility as a curriculum designer?
Curriculum such that they can self-learn.
To impart the ability to self learn in them, right? Otherwise, you're making them your slaves. And that's why our education system is tragic today, right? You're spoon feeding them all through because you're saying they can't learn. That's where we've underestimated them. No? I would say if the person can't self-learn, can I gamify it? Can I bring in good activities and all? Let the person wonder, slowly converge and come to the concept. I may be slow, but that's okay. It's a one-time activity to teach the person how to self-learn. I'll do it in fractions, but in decimals, I need not do that much. And talking about some teachers who cannot do that, yeah, at the moment we have teachers who cannot do that. But again, can you give a small framework through which the teachers can learn how to figure that out? Start with the most basic things, right? Start with the most basic things. Let them figure it out. Once they figure out the basic thing, from there they can work out everything else. No? So I'm saying there are solutions provided the curriculum designer and the teacher can trust the student. So you guys are excited about this?
I have 2 worksheet ideas.
So by tomorrow, try and maybe at least doodle on a paper, if not a fair worksheet. So we can discuss that tomorrow. How about you, Satya?
All right, I'll also try to.
Sure. I look forward to seeing your Palash, Rucha, Avantika, Satya, all of you. I look forward to seeing your ideas tomorrow. And I hope it will be fun, making some really fun worksheets for the world to start thinking and start learning. There's a saying in Sanskrit, right? Saraswati's, treasure is so wonderful. The more you share it, the more it grows. Goddess Saraswati's treasure is so wonderful. The more you share it, the more it grows. That you have a certain learning, you democratize that, your learning only grows with you. Good night, everyone. Thank you for